Welcome to Notes on a Painting. Notes on a Painting is a podcast by artist Olivia Kemp and art historian Esme Garlake. Together each week we will discuss a painting that one of us has chosen and researched. Our choices of painting will reflect where our tastes differ and overlap across the history of art.
Hello,
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I am good.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what painting do we have?
I have a work by Edwin Landseer, and I've gone for the absolute biscuit tin classic, The Monarch of the Glen, 1851, and it lives in is it the National Galleries of Scotland or the Scottish National Gallery? It seems to be called different things on different websites. Finding it a
I've
bit.
always heard the National Gallery of, but
Okay, we'll go with National Gallery of Scotland then.
I don't really know.
And the sources of for this week's episode are the National Gallery London website, when they had the work returned to the gallery for a brief exhibition, the Scottish National Gallery website, or the National Galleries of Scotland website, whatever, Wikipedia, and the Art UK website.
Mm, nice.
Would you like to describe the painting?
Yes. So this is a painting of a big stag. If that was all of my description, could it work? No. Um, so yeah, there's a really very muscular, large stag in the foreground on actually his legs are cut off at the bottom. It's a square painting. His legs are cut off at the about the knees. Um, and he's standing in a grassy um patch. I don't know. It's there's lots kind of heather and quite light, fluffy, like grasses underneath him. And then behind there's this amazing light blue, misty, cloudy mountainscape. Um, there are mountains kind of, I guess, along like the middle line of the painting, but there's this really large cloud above, quite light cloud, like bluey, light blue cloud, but it almost blurs over the mountains and into this mist, this white mist that seems to be rising from, I guess, like a valley below. So it's, and also the stag is looking into the distance very majestically, quite like a portrait almost. And yeah, his antlers are absolutely massive. He's got a massive belly. He's got a big ruff as well around him, not quite like the Dutch Golden Age ruffs, but more like my cat's ruff. Yeah, nice and fluffy. Yeah, I think that's it. But I do, like I've said before, I find these landscape ones hard, and then you're like, I brought you a landscape with a massive stack in the middle, and I'm like, oh God, this is gonna be even weirder. So yes.
Some of them are easier to describe than others.
Yeah. I find it hard when you're describing like the way that mist or falls or the clouds fall for some reason. Because I guess it emphasizes like how you used to looking at people or like a central figure is. And then when you
Mm.
look to the background, it can be like in the Gainsborough landscape, that one I found hard because you're like trying to pin it on the little details as
Yeah.
opposed to the big landscape. But yeah. I'm excited to learn more. A Landseer.
Okay. So, Edwin Landseer was born in London in 1802 and was the son of the engraver John Landseer, who was known for landscape works. He was one of seven children that survived to adulthood. They had, I think, they had 14, but seven survived to adulthood, four of which became artists. And he was recognized early as having great talent and was put under the tutelage of several artists, including his father and also the history painter Benjamin Robert Hayden, as were several of his siblings. And Hayden encouraged Landseer to attend dissections and study the animal form and skeleton. When he was only 12, one of his paintings was exhibited at the Royal Academy as an honorary exhibitor.
Oh, so he's actually, so Simeon Solomon was 18,
Ah, yeah.
but this guy, oh my God, sorry, the cat. But this guy is
Quite
12.
precocious.
That's
Yeah.
crazy. Why are they always so successful?
I don't know. Um, so his life was very much intertwined with the RA. When we say RA, we mean Royal Academy.
Mm.
Um, throughout. So they will come up they come up a lot in terms of where he's showing and where he's selling. And he became an RA, an academician, at the minimum age of 24. So as soon as he was old enough, he became an academician, which is quite impressive because someone has to die for you to become an academician. So they obviously had a spot ready for him.
Wow.
Um, so his older brother, Thomas Landseer, was also an artist and was actually deaf, like their father. He specialized in
Mm.
engraving and etching, and he's now best known for his engravings of Edwin's work.
Okay.
Charles also became an RA and specialized in history painting.
Mm.
And, rather not excitingly, Jessica Landseer was a landscape and miniature painting who had some breaks in her career while she kept house for Edwin and then later cared for him when he was older.
Oh, kept
But I
house.
know, right?
Yeesh.
She also exhibited 10 pictures at the Royal Academy.
Cool.
When you look her up, there's a really lovely landscape and then some little miniatures, but several of them are lithographs after her original, so I haven't
Mm.
managed to find much
Mm.
originals. Um, yeah, there's not a lot, but interesting. It's quite a few sketches
Yeah.
and little drawings of dogs and bits and bobs.
Wow, a very, yeah, I mean, a very artistic family. And I guess once they were in with the Royal Academy, they
Mm,
clearly made the best use of it, of the
definitely. So that was it. Two of them were RAs. One was an ARA, which I don't know what that means. I'm not
assistant.
associate.
No,
I don't know.
associate sounds
Uh,
ridiculous.
accountant, something like
Yeah.
that. And then Jessica just exhibited there. So
Okay.
back to Edwin. So
Mm.
he befriended the painter and writer Charles Robert Leslie, and Leslie described him as a curly-headed youngster dividing his time between Polito's wild beasts and the Royal Academy schools. And when he says Politos, he's referring to a menagerie of wild animals that was owned by Stephen Polito. So
Oh.
he obviously had that strong interest in
Hmm.
animals and painting
Hmm.
from quite an early stage in his career. And one of his earliest paintings is credited as the origin of the myth that St. Bernard dogs in the Alps carry a little casket of brandy on their necks. So it's a painting called Alpine Mastiffs Reanimating a Distressed Traveller in 1820, and it shows two dogs standing over a man who's partly buried in the snow. One is
Mm.
barking to attract attention, while the other one has a little barrel and is attempting to revive the man. I
With
don't know where the
brandy.
brandy comes in, but apparently that's where the myth comes from.
I mean, the brandy to revive people, that seems to be like I had a family friend who said that her childhood hamster apparently would annually be revived by a bit of whiskey and apparently lived for like 6 years, which is insane. But I feel like this was a generation, like maybe like our grandparents' generation even, still feel like the thing of being revived with some kind of strong alcohol was, and it seems very Victorian to have a little brandy St.
It
Bernard.
definitely seems quite Victorian idea, doesn't it?
Yeah, and also the drama of it, of like the kind of narrative and the nobility of the dogs, and yeah, very
Yeah,
very Landseer
very
actually.
Lancet. There's a lot of
Yeah,
noble dogs and a lot of dogs rescuing things and
one might say too many, in fact,
maybe.
but depends on your taste.
So in 1823, Landseer was commissioned to paint a portrait of Georgiana Russell, who was the Duchess of Bedford, and he began giving her art lessons, and the Duke and Duchess paid Landseer really generously for the portrait of Georgiana. And
Mhm.
soon she embarked on an affair with Landseer, despite being 20 years his senior.
Ooh.
And the Duke seems to have been aware of the affair as well, which is interesting. And an
Oh.
engraving of the portrait of her was published in the Keepsake Annual for 1829, which is an English literary annual that came out every Christmas. I haven't managed to see an image of the original, just the Keepsake engraving.
Mm.
It's been suggested that Landseer proposed marriage to Georgiana in 1840 and that she rejected him. Um, and he did never marry. Only one of his siblings actually married.
Mm.
Whether he proposed or not is very much up for debate, and I can't find any sources for that suggestion, but potential.
Drama
Drama. It seems unlikely that a duchess would
was gonna marry
marry someone 20 years their senior who was an artist, junior,
him.
but who knows? He
Yeah.
was, he did achieve quite a lot of social status, so maybe that would
Mm.
embolden him a little bit. I don't know. So in 1824, Landseer and Charles Robert Leslie visited Scotland together, and the trip had a really great impression on Landseer. The
Mm.
Highlands, in particular, were a source of significant inspiration for him and provided him with both human and animal subjects for some of his most well-known works. He's quoted as saying, "I have been further north this season, and I'm a little crazy with the beauties of the Highlands."
Oh, I went to the Highlands last year and they are incredibly beautiful.
Mm.
So fair enough. Have you been?
No, I haven't been that far north.
Oh, so good. I
I'm
don't even
trying
think I've
to.
seen the most dramatic, like the mountains in this, like in the photos I've seen, I haven't been to see the most dramatic parts of it, but it's wild,
Yeah.
literally.
Literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
So, and Monarch of the Glen was another one of his Scottish works, which was painted in 1851. When the work was shown in London, I think it's 2017, the National Gallery wrote, "No British painting of the 19th century is as immediately recognisable as the Monarch of the Glen. It has so often been reproduced that it's part of our shared visual memory. However, this means that it can be hard to look at it with fresh eyes." So it was the
Mm.
Great Fire of 1834 that destroyed the Palace of Westminster, which led to Landseer receiving the commission for Monarch of the Glen and several other works. And the plans were to rebuild the establishment and to establish a fine arts commission for the building,
Mm.
which included Sir Charles Eastlake, who went on to become the first director of the National Gallery. And he commissioned those works from Landseer to decorate the new building. But once they were completed, the House of Commons refused to grant the £150 promised for the commission, which is about £16,000.
Yeah.
As a result, the paintings were sold to private collectors.
That's really weird. So they just
Mm.
commissioned them but didn't pay.
Yeah, I don't understand how that amount of money as well could
Yeah.
go, like, just be agreed on and then reneged on. It seems
Yeah.
pretty,
Hmm.
I don't know.
So it didn't end up in the
No,
public collection. Okay.
no, so they never went into the Houses of Westminster, which
Mm.
I think is I'll get into it, but it's why one of the reasons why it ended up becoming such a proliferated image, because it didn't just go straight into a public collection and stay there.
Mm.
So the painting of a life-size stag was exhibited at the RA in 1851, and the painting changed hands repeatedly through private hands or through Christie's. In 1916, the work sold to Pears Soap Company, who used the image as part of their advertising. Then
No
it was
way.
sold to John Dewar and Sons Distillery, and it became their trademark before it went on to be used by Glenfiddich. In November 2016, the work went back up for sale by the Dewar Alcohol Group had been purchased by someone, but they didn't own the rights to reproduce the painting itself. They just had the painting, something along those lines. So it went up for sale because they couldn't get any monetary value from
Mm.
it. And the National Galleries of Scotland were offered the work for half of its estimated value of 8 million, and so half would have been 4 million.
Mm.
And the gallery launched a campaign to raise the funds to buy the work for the nation, which was ultimately successful. According to the Sunday Herald, the painting became a cliche by the mid 20th century as the ultimate biscuit tin image of Scotland. Its usage in the 1940s included a McVitie's biscuit tin, and I've seen so many biscuit tins with stags on over the years as well. And
Yeah.
among plenty of other uses, the painting has been used on the labels of Baxter's soup, as the backdrop on the front desk of the Rosebud Motel in Schitt's Creek and on an ELO album cover.
Oh, really?
Also an insurance company as well. So
God.
it's this that's a massive contributing factor as to why we struggle to see the work as for its artistic merit and as just simply a painting, as opposed to what it represents and in our sort
Mm.
of visual memory. That repetition of the image, even if it's not a specific copy, it's been loosely used a lot
Yeah.
as well, which
Oh,
means
yeah.
it just represents so much to us beyond the value of it as a painting alone.
You know, the thing that comes to mind as well is is it the Old Grouse whiskey? It's like Scottish whiskey, I think. My
Mm,
grandfather used to drink it, and it for some reason it's also weirdly attached to this painting as well, because it's like a similar kind of like grouse out in the mountain. And obviously a grouse is so different from a stag, but I still
mm,
feel like that kind of association of like, yeah, the Scottish Highlands like whiskey or shortbread or like all of this stuff is put into a branding
yeah,
with like animals and landscape, and then it just logs in your memory as that rather
yeah.
than like, so even with this, yeah, you're right. It's funny now also we're literally talking about biscuit tin images after so many paintings I've brought and being like, they're biscuit tin, but this is literally
This one
biscuit
was
tin.
literally on a McVitie's biscuit tin, and I've seen it. I've seen similar images. I think even like last year, I think
Yeah.
M&S had a stag on their Christmas biscuit
Yeah.
tin.
Like
Yeah,
it is just familiar, even if it's not a stag, like even if it's a bull or a rabbit or something. Like it's the kind of this does just seem to have that. I think it's also the looking out into the distance, isn't it? That
yeah. And
it's just
then it being like seeing the image so much when they were campaigning to
yeah.
save it for the nation as well. It
Yeah.
feels like you've seen this picture over and over and over and over
Yeah.
throughout your life.
Yeah.
I think that's had a big impact on his artistic legacy.
Mm.
So one of the reasons for the great proliferation of Landseer's image is that in his lifetime, his appeal crossed all class boundaries, and reproductions of his work were really common in middle class homes as well. He was
Mm.
also popular with the aristocracy, and Queen Victoria commissioned numerous pictures from him. Initially, he was painting the royal pets, and then he moved into images of gillies and gamekeepers. And then in the year before her marriage, she commissioned a portrait of herself. He also taught Victoria and Albert to etch and made
Wow.
portraits of their children as babies, usually in the company of a dog. He also made two portraits of Victoria and Albert dressed for costume balls at which he was a guest. And one of his
Wow.
last paintings was a life-size equestrian portrait of the Queen, which was shown at the RA in 1873, made from earlier sketches.
Mm.
So he was very busy with the royals.
Yeah, very. But interesting that his images were also popular with the middle classes of Victorian Britain then.
Yeah, they were reproduced as prints and
Yeah.
sold a lot.
Yeah,
So,
it was prints that allowed that, wasn't it? The proliferation of the images.
yeah,
Yeah.
and his brother was printing them.
Oh yeah, of course.
So yes, there are quite a few. Did you see that portrait? I think we talk about that exhibition at the Wallace Collection of Dogs. It was a
Yeah.
few years ago. So there was quite a lot of Landseers in that. Some
So
of them,
many.
some of them were, really beautiful, and some of them were like dogs telling a popular nursery rhyme, and dogs in bonnets, and dogs in tam o'
Yeah, they're
shanter.
very allegorical and moralizing, aren't they? Yeah.
And definitely some of them were bordering on twee.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, and there's a style as well with the actual painting, like in this as well, that you can see where, like, I don't know what it is, but it's quite matte almost. I don't know, like, and it felt like the paint itself is quite I don't know how to describe, but like the fur, like it really works with the fur, but
Mm,
it also does have some kind of, for me, it seems quite toy, the
yeah.
effect of it. I don't know, I'm not describing it well, but like when you're in front of them, they are quite, I guess, almost airbrushed in a way. Like it feels quite sweet and yeah, fluffy. And even in this one, which isn't meant to be sweet per
Mm.
se, it still has that like matte lightness to it.
Yeah,
I
the
don't
color
know.
palette is very
The
color
color
driven.
palette as well. But I think also the textures of his paint, particularly,
Mm,
can sometimes be, yeah, I don't know. I just remember being, it was interesting. That exhibition was amazing, to be honest, just for the weirdness that we spoke about before. But yeah, I think it was a little heavy on the Landseers.
very Landseer heavy.
But useful to see because
Mm,
yeah, now like looking at this painting, I do kind of I think once you've seen an artist's works in person, you kind of get a sense of what their textures and colors are like.
yeah,
Then when you see a painting like this, you can kind of remember it a bit
yeah.
more. Yeah.
So some of Landseer's later work, such as his Flood in the Highlands and Man Proposes, God Disposes, both of which were painted in 1864, are
Mm.
more pessimistic in their tone.
Mm.
Man Proposes, God Disposes shows two polar bears toying with the bones of the dead and other remains from Sir John Franklin's failed Arctic expedition. The painting was purchased at auction by Thomas Holloway and now hangs in the picture gallery of Royal Holloway University in London. And it's a college tradition to cover the painting with a Union Jack when exams are held in the gallery, as there's a long-standing rumour that the painting drives people mad when they sit too near it.
That's bizarre. Quite cool, I guess.
But yeah, unusual.
It's
Oh,
nice
well,
to have a little tradition, you know?
even if it is rather strange.
Yeah. They usually are, aren't they?
Yeah. So in 1858, Landseer embarked on another iconic work, which was the four bronze lions for the base of Nelson's column in Trafalgar Square.
No way.
Hmm.
That's Landseer.
Hmm.
What? Oh my gosh. Those lions. They're
Yeah.
so majestic.
So Landseer seems to have either made the process quite complicated or perhaps he was just really dedicated to completing the job right. He
Mm.
accepted the commission on the condition that he would not have to start for another 9 months. And there was a further delay when he asked to be supplied with copies of casts from a real lion that he knew were in the possession of the Academy in Turin. And the request proved complex, and the casts did not arrive until the summer of 1860, which was already 2 years after he got the commission. The lions were made at the Kensington studio of Carlo Marochetti, who was an Italian French sculptor who cast them.
Oh.
And the work was slowed by Landseer's ill health and his difficult relationship with Marochetti. And the sculptures were finally installed in 1867, 9 years after he was awarded the commission.
Wow. That's a lot.
Yeah, took a
But
little.
was he a sculptor as
Yeah,
well?
he did.
He was.
Yeah,
I mean, presumably he was, but I just was thinking if he was using casts, but I guess he was using casts to help him.
yeah, as reference for the
Yeah.
lions rather than
Yeah.
just reusing those casts.
Yeah.
I don't
You'd
really know
have to
what process
like
he would have
make
had if that
them
was it.
bigger and yeah, it would be complicated. Yeah.
Mm. So Landseer died in 1873, and some form of mourning was widely taken up in England. He was buried at St Paul's Cathedral. London shops and houses had their blinds lowered, flags flew at half
Blimey.
mast, and his bronze lions at the base of Nelson's column were hung with wreaths. There were large crowds lining the streets to watch his funeral cortege pass by as well.
Blimey.
Yeah. I
He
think
was
it
a
must have been
popular
his
guy.
relationship with the royals because he's buried
Yeah.
at St Paul's, and
Yeah.
for people to make that kind of marking of a funeral, I think that's usually sort of
Yeah.
led by
Yeah.
uh, the royal family.
Also, this is like height of the British Empire. Like, I presume that processions and marking important royal affiliates were like pretty common as well.
Yeah,
Especially someone who's making the four lions. Like,
yeah,
yeah, it's probably, yeah, a celebrated figure at that time. Yeah.
definitely.
Mm.
And he left three unfinished works behind, which he actually bequeathed to the pre-Raphaelite painter John Everett Millais to finish, which
Oh.
he did.
Oh,
Yeah,
really? That's quite cool.
yeah, which is interesting, like to sort of posthumously commission someone to finish your paintings. It's
Yeah.
kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so now it's kind of interesting to consider what his legacy is, as like for a long time his kind of Victorian painting has been really out of fashion. And I
Mm.
think now that's sort of slowly turning, and there's
Mm.
like some definitely some renewed interest in some of the Victorian painters, not all. And obviously, like his work still holds a great amount of value, but there was a period of time where the value of Victorian painting really plummeted.
Mm,
And it's still kind of hard to see his work for its artistic merit when there's so many kind of like dogs telling a nursery rhyme story and
yeah.
child with
Yeah.
puppy. And then
Yeah.
there's quite a few sort of Victorian melodrama, like, you know, I think there's one of like a drowned person like being pulled out the sea by a dog, and it's quite
Yeah.
over the top. So I
Yeah.
don't, and then you've got that issue of the proliferation of his images and how they've been
Mm,
used. He's quite a difficult one to get a
mm,
grasp on in terms of
mm.
legacy and what those images sort of represent now.
Yeah. I guess from a like as a historical period, it tells us about like attitude, a lot about attitudes to animals, I imagine, in that
Mm,
time. Like as a like yeah, the moralizing, but also like the hierarchies of animals that they have, I
yeah,
guess, and like national identities and like strength and like I guess it's also it's the kind of survival of the fittest narrative as well.
yeah,
And I know a lot of his as well, like the more moralizing ones are like some were like in the Wallace collection, in the Wallace exhibition, on dogs. I remember some were like poor, the poor and the wealthy. And not that he was like, I don't think he particularly had a problem with that, but it's the kind of Victorian morals
mm,
that I think also when I guess that's more obvious with the allegorical ones, but even this stag is very much I like historically bound up with land as well, I imagine, in terms of like the game hunting and lands in the Highlands as a place to hunt and like,
yeah,
you know, for wealthy Victorians and the royals to enjoy themselves. And it's really interesting that this was commissioned as part of the to try and create a national collection or something equivalent to that. And
yeah,
yeah, I don't know. I know there are art historians at the moment who are very interested in animal studies and like the history of animals. And the Victorians are just so there's so much to say, isn't there, with the Victorians?
yeah,
What are we, and so much of our world today is impacted by what the Victorians were doing that it
yeah,
feels so, yeah, when the art, when a lot of the artwork is familiar or twee or used on biscuit tins and all of this, it's hard sometimes to recognize them as being like more, I guess, like historical documents rather than just these images.
I think
Yeah.
sometimes you can break through that by seeing the work in person and
Yeah.
appreciate its like presence or its painterly qualities.
Mm.
But sometimes again with these Victorian works, they're like heavily varnished and behind glass, and your level of engagement with them is difficult again anyway.
Yeah. And
But
also the proliferation, not just of the prints, which is huge, but also of the number of paintings there are like this. Like, yes, this is very famous, but there's so many that
there's
Landseer.
so many, even lots of
Made.
stags, loads
Yeah.
of stags, and a lot of stags sort of doing moral sort of stories like the death of the
Mhm.
stags, and it's
Yeah.
surrounded by the does, and it's like lying on a rock, and it's all
Yeah.
very dramatic. And
Hmm.
there's a lot of more melodramatic stag paintings than this
Hmm.
one.
Yeah. Yeah, there are. I was thinking about like also Rosa Bonheur and like the way that she was able to make a career out of animal paintings and just how yeah, so much of it as well was about having tied up with royal or wealthy possession of animals as well,
Yeah.
like the lions and the. I mean, actually quite surprised that he wanted, that Landseer wanted a cast of a lion because I was thinking, you know, you could just go to London Zoo or probably Queen Victoria could get her hands on a few lions.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think there were
so
paintings by him of lions as well.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a. I think the proliferation of prints as well is so interesting. Like we talked about it in the Turner episode we did as well. It really, any popular painter of the 19th century has these prints
Mm.
going out to, but I think, yeah, I wonder how, whether to exhibit these works, they need to be shown alongside works that are quite different to them as well. I don't know, like I felt like
Mm.
with the exhibition, the Wallace exhibition, it felt like just too much of the same of
Hmm.
these dogs. And I feel like if there was this stag painting, but alongside quite different paintings, it might help to
Yeah, it's
jolt
sort of
me
like if you
out
had a
of,
George Stubbs exhibition and just showed just the portraits of horses that he did for wealthy clients, because these were
yeah,
portraits of dogs that Landseer did for
yeah,
wealthy clients. And obviously he's making money from it and he's using a kind of pre-made idea in his
mhm,
head of
yeah,
repeating because that's a money earner and it's
yeah.
popular. If you put them all together, I'm not sure that he would be comfortable with that exhibition. It
Yeah,
might,
it's true. I mean, maybe it's good to see how much was being made, just the sheer quantity and
mm,
therefore the popularity of it. But yeah, I wonder whether I think sometimes contrasts can really help to jolt you out of familiar
yeah,
familiar paintings. Yeah, but I also think the popular history of this painting, the way that this image has had a whole other afterlife, or all of these afterlives, is great. That would be quite a cool exhibition. Imagine if they brought together all of the different biscuit tins and like
every proliferation of the Monarch of the Glen.
quite cool. Yeah. Yeah.
I'd go see it.
Yeah, me too. Well, we'd have to, I think, after this episode. Thank you for joining us this week. We can never be 100% sure of the accuracy of historical events. However, the information we are providing is based on our own research. If there's a painting you'd like to hear us discuss, please let us know on social media. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for weekly episodes.